In an effort to understand the impact of the Russia-Ukraine conflict on global treasurers, we have created a short flash survey that will run through March 3rd. We invite you to take this 7-question survey at strategictreasurer.com/flash to give confidential responses to how your organization is reacting to the evolving situation. It will take just a few minutes at strategictreasurer.com/flash, and we look forward to sharing the results on upcoming podcasts and social media.
Welcome to the Open Treasury Podcast, your go-to source for the latest news and analysis in corporate cash and treasury management. This show is brought to you by CTMfile.com and the Treasury News Network, where Treasury professionals learn and share the information that matters most.
Hello and a warm welcome to the Open Treasury Podcast from CTMfile. I am Pushpendra Mehta, Executive Writer for CTMfile. My guest for today is Craig Jeffery, Managing Partner at Strategic Treasurer. Welcome back to the Open Treasury Podcast, Craig.
Push, it's good to be here. I know there's a lot going on in the world and also in the Treasury and finance space while there's a major invasion going on in Europe.
Yes, absolutely. Very unfortunate. Let's begin our weekly review of the latest Treasury news and developments that are worth looking into a bit more fully. There were plenty of newsworthy items for global trade and finance in the shadow of Putin's attack on Ukraine. Our highlighted stories will reflect this. Let's get started, shall we? The first newsworthy piece is about Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Russia is the world's biggest exporter of wheat, fertilizer, urea, and palladium, the second largest producer of gas, and the third largest producer in the world in terms of oil. Russia is also a significant producer of aluminium, copper, platinum, titanium, and nickel. And yet Russia is less than 2% of the world's GDP. Craig, is the Russian story about commodities, and more commodities, or is there more to it? And what, in your opinion, is the global economic impact of Russia's invasion of Ukraine?
Yeah, there's quite a bit there. I mean, commodities certainly play a big role. It seems to me that oil is one of the biggest issues there with the Nord Stream pipeline and fueling Europe as a big provider. If their supply is cut off or redirected, that will create a significant ripple impact for costs. That's probably one of the biggest and most immediate impacts globally, I think, on concerns about oil production, particularly with the U.S. having cut back on production before. Where is this going to be made up? How is that going to ripple through the rest of the economy? Because increase in energy costs has a feedback impact on everything else that we do, things that are shipped, how we warm or cool our homes. This is major. So commodity is that commodity is probably one of the biggest ones in the short term. Wheat and food, we've seen what those problems have brought us in the past with famine in different areas due to shipping and moving. Hopefully there's enough foresight and planning to prevent some of those types of issues. But I think another impact for those in the car and auto industry, some of these metals that go into an already challenged production line or production lines for autos, everything from electric vehicles to regular cars, some of those commodities and metals, that's probably way overweighted in what the impact will be. Certainly Russia is not a big economy, but those impacts on the margins will have an outsized impact on cost, inflation, even some human considerations.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. The second story that merits discussion is about Société, Générale, and Credit Suisse Group halting the finance of commodities trading from Russia. It seems the world finance community is quickly supporting sanctions. Craig, how important is this?
Well, I think this is, an extension of the story of some of the sanctions that are placed on by countries, central banks, the EU, SWIFT. And so some of these large banks, Générale, SocGen, Credit Suisse, this is just further tightening and isolation of Russia. These are fairly significant plays, maybe not dramatic, but they're significant because it continues to hem them in on the economic side. How long before that makes a significant impact might be debated. It may not be long enough from the invasion standpoint. The invasion may be well over before those have enough of an impact to stop Putin's invasion of Ukraine. But those are significant. Some of the largest banks, so beyond SocGen and Credit Suisse, ING, Rabobank, those are some that have stopped. Even Visa and MasterCard blocked a number of Russian banks from their networks. And MasterCard even said, we'll continue to work with regulators in the days ahead to abide fully by our compliance obligations as they evolve. And so a lot of this is fast moving, and these financial institutions, payment networks are responding as rapidly as they can.
The third piece of news that caught my attention is an extension of what we've discussed so far. This pertains to Russia being decoupled from SWIFT, the global interbank payment system. So, Craig, what do you think would be the impact of banning Russia from SWIFT, and how important is this? I'd love your perspective on this.
This is very significant, especially as time wears on. 1 day or 2 days, it has an immediate impact. Some of these various sanctions, restrictions from trading, that's pushed up the interest rate that the central bank in Russia is charging. I think it went from 9.5% to 20%. I haven't looked at it in the last couple of days, but certainly that's a pretty steep hit. You think about it, I guess I'd say two ways. One is SWIFT doesn't move money, but without SWIFT, it's very difficult to do trade. And, it's kind of like there's the military on the ground, and then there's the command and control process, and you have to be able to communicate to your forces to move them. And if you take out command and control, everything sits and doesn't know what to do or what's going on. And SWIFT is like this command and control process. This is all the messaging. All the banks communicate. All the major banks communicate, share information when you're going across border or you're looking globally. This is how banks, communicate. I mean, even sometimes within the country, they do this. And so it doesn't stop, any internal, Russia's internal transfer mechanism, their payment systems, those continue. But how they interface with the world, that's their whole command and control for their, financial assets, their financial messaging is now slowed to a trickle. I mean, they're doing some through partnerships with what they have with China. China doesn't appear to be as willing to extend too much to Russia for this type of behavior during this type of set. I think China's being a lot more cautious. They didn't vote to veto what the UN had registered, as opposed to just vetoing in lockstep with Russia. These are very, very significant. Central bank restrictions beyond SWIFT targeted more than $600 billion US in reserves. For Russia, that's a really significant amount. I mean, that's a significant amount for any country, really, but certainly for Russia, this is significant. So this limits Russia's ability to support the ruble as it craters or falls due to some of these Western-oriented restrictions. And in some cases, this is a significant weapon in the war. It's a little more slow-moving than bombs and tanks, but it is a significant tool, particularly for the long-term aspect. This isolation, restricting the ability to feed, fuel, and fund the military. There's a much shortened time frame for them to do that. Will that be enough? It doesn't appear to be that'll be enough, but it is a significant tool in the toolkit for fighting these things. But it's just financial is one point.
You mentioned that China may or is being cautious this time around. I'd like to ask you another question pertaining to SWIFT. The consequences of barring Russia from SWIFT, do you think it will draw China and Russia to establish an alternative payment system, or perhaps piggyback on China's cross-border interbank payment system and SWIFT equivalent to aid the internationalization of the yuan? What are your thoughts on this?
I think this has been going on for over 5 years, trying to set up some alternatives and backup. I think there's a number of nation states that don't play as well. Some that are pariah states like North Korea, Cuba, et cetera, that would be very much in favor. Maybe even Iran, that would be very much in favor of alternative payment networks, messaging networks that allow them to continue to trade and not be subject to the financial pressures. So I think this is really continuation of the same path that a number have been pursuing, trying to decouple from the dollar, not being restricted to use through the largest method of financial messaging. So I think there'll be more of that. There'll always be this idea that we don't want to be restricted, financially.
The next topic for discussion revolves around PNC Bank's unit, PNC Treasury Management's launch, or what is being described as a groundbreaking new on-demand pay solution. Craig, what is the purpose of this on-demand payroll tool, and what could this mean for business and employees?
Well, Push, I'm glad we have a topic that's not about the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm glad that we have something that in our view has bubbled enough to the top. But what is this? This is it's a tool that is an on-demand payment solution. When I think of on-demand pay, I think of Uber or some of the other gig economy companies that have moved. Particularly Uber started where their drivers can collect payment up to 4 times a day. They can do a couple rides, hit a payment, money gets transferred to their account. They can buy gas, food, or whatever they want to do, and they can do that up to 4 times a day. Wow, that's a tremendous amount of not waiting paycheck to paycheck, but maybe even ride to ride. And so what we have here is we have this broader offering by PNC, which lets employees, I think this is targeted at fairly large companies. The article indicates you have to have at least 500 employees, but you can access your earned pay at any point in the cycle. And while you or I may think is this really needed? The idea that there is an expectation from the gig economy of being able to get paid when you want to get paid. The ability to pay really quickly is now far easier, supported by some of these rapid payment methods. And when you think about employee retention, there are some people that have a hard time living paycheck to paycheck, or they want the flexibility to draw when they need or when they've earned it. And this is going to be a way of attracting employees and probably a way of retaining employees as well. So I find this extremely interesting. So here's some of the details on that. So anybody using this service can convert their employees' time worked into net earnings, and the available balance that they have can be accessed by a mobile app at any time, day or night, any day of the year. And they can say, I want the money today, I want it next day. And this flexibility lets them get cash when they need it. No more, pay advance, if that's, there's some companies that still allow that. No more having to fill out forms and do that. It's just self-service. I can get my pay advance when I want. I think this is significant because the gig economy, the mindset, the new age cohorts that are coming through, and the tech that supports this and the faster payments that exist is making this available more so. And while I may think in some ways, is that really needed? It is coming, not like a tsunami, but like a very strong tidal wave hitting first the pure gig economy, now expanding to other areas. So I think there's more to come. I think PNC and their partnership here have are tapping into a significant trend. So we'll probably see more of this.
Finally, what is your choice for the biggest or most important story of the past week, and why?
I think I'm going to go with the disconnection from SWIFT. I don't know, in 10 years if that will be the biggest story for the next conflict that we face. But I think that's the biggest story because that decouples and supports everything the different central banks are doing to put economic pressure and economic sanctions on Russia. I think disconnecting them from that network is probably the biggest economic tool that's put to play for immediate impact. And we've seen that coupled with some of the other activities really putting a challenge to the ruble. The cost that they have to run this invasion every day is high, and this makes their staying power shorter. I don't think it'll be enough. There's just their military. I'm no military expert, but I can listen to the news, see an army that is funded at 10x their neighbor, with superior firepower, not superior will, but superior power, and certainly some level of brutality. That means there's a limited time that Ukraine can resist the major advance, and then it becomes some other type of warfare. So I think for long-term occupation, this pressure keeps up. I think that's probably enough to break Russia long-term. I don't think it's enough to stop the invasion. But again, I'm talking about things I really don't know about there. But on the economic side, I can see long-term this is extremely impactful to Russia. Probably not enough on the short term.
And if I may ask you, do you think this would set a precedent for any future conflicts as a deterrent, perhaps, for other countries?
I think it has been. I mean, this has been used sparingly. I think it was used on Russia, in Crimea. I think they used it then. I'm sure they used it then and shut it down. It's been used against Iran in different times. So when nations act in an extremely aggressive manner, something that's not seen as even marginally justified, most of the rest of the world rises up and says, we're not going to let you do this. So this has been a significant tool. This has been a significant tool put in place to track not just money laundering, but certainly terrorism funding and these type of actions. So I think it'll continue. I think there's those nation states that are doing this are working on ways of getting around that. I mean, you can hear stories about Russia trying to move more to crypto, having an impact, on some of the pricing there, trying to move into less trackable methods. And so, yeah, I think you're right that this will continue to be a tool. I think there's a lot of forces to make this a less impactful tool over time and weaken it. And I think that will be the case over time. Not diminish it entirely, but certainly weaken it.
That was an interesting analysis, Craig. A big thank you to you and to our CTM audience for joining us on this edition of Open Treasury. Please subscribe and look in the show notes for the article links. Thank you.
Share your thoughts by visiting strategictreasurer.com/flash.
This podcast is provided for informational purposes only, and statements made by Strategic Treasurer LLC on this podcast are not intended as legal, business, consulting, or tax advice. For more information, visit and bookmark strategictreasurer.com.